You know, when that request for this deep dive hit my inbox,
My first thought was like, whoa, 1 year already. Yeah.
it really does feel like time flies, even when it feels like,
Everything is just like the world's holding its breath.
yeah.
So we're diving into the CNN article you sent over, taking stock of Gaza 1 year after the Hamas attack on Israel.
Yeah, and it's heavy stuff.
I mean, even for someone like me who follows this really closely,
Right.
you're looking for some clarity in the chaos, right? You
Yeah.
want, I think, the key events, you want the human impact.
And maybe try to figure out where things go from here.
Okay, so let's unpack this, starting with life in Gaza before the attack last October.
And the CNN piece,
It's bleak.
they describe a region already in a full-blown humanitarian crisis.
And that's fascinating in itself, right?
Yeah, because I think you have to understand that pre-existing crisis to really understand this escalation.
Gaza had been under a blockade for years.
I mean, we're talking severe restrictions on movement, on trade, on access to, like, basic necessities.
Well, imagine a pressure cooker.
Right.
Yeah.
That's Gaza before the attack.
Now picture this. It's a Saturday morning, October 7, 2023.
Hundreds of people, young people are at a music festival near the Gaza border.
And then this horrifyingly coordinated assault.
Hamas fighters breach the border fence at multiple points, and they're targeting civilians.
I mean, the images from that day, just the chaos, the carnage.
Oh, yeah.
Like
It's seared into our collective memory.
Absolutely.
Over 1,400 Israelis and foreign nationals were killed.
The initial attacks.
And that death toll alone is almost impossible to process.
But then you add in the hostage taking.
It just becomes
This whole other
level of horror.
It was a terrifying escalation, and I think the world watched in shock.
As Netanyahu vowed to annihilate Hamas.
Biden pledged unwavering support to Israel. And then on the other side, you had Iran openly backing Hamas.
Talk about, like, geopolitical fault lines, just
Yeah.
impossible to ignore at that point.
Totally.
So what was the immediate fallout from those first few days?
So Israel responds swiftly, decisively.
With a complete siege on Gaza.
No electricity, no food, no fuel, no medical supplies. I mean,
Try to imagine being trapped in that situation.
I'm trying to, and I can't even begin to fathom the fear and desperation.
Of those first few days, especially for families with young children.
Oh, absolutely.
And we're talking about almost the entire population of Gaza, right? Yeah, nearly 2 million people displaced, seeking refuge wherever they could.
The images from that time are truly heartbreaking.
And the CNN article, I think, does a really powerful job of conveying this.
Through their reporting on Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza City.
Al-Shifa.
Tell us about that.
So it's the largest hospital in Gaza.
And it was quickly overwhelmed.
And remember, this is a population already dealing with a healthcare system that was on the brink.
Now facing this deluge of injuries and trauma.
And the article does a good job, I think, of painting this vivid picture.
You know, doctors working by candlelight.
Babies wrapped in foil to keep warm.
Those images, those details,
They really stay with you.
it's such a stark reminder of the very real human cost of this conflict.
Absolutely. And it wasn't just the physical injuries, right?
It was the psychological trauma, the fear, the uncertainty.
And in the middle of all of that, in late November, there was this brief glimmer of hope.
A 7-day truce brokered between Israel and Hamas.
And here's where it gets really interesting, right?
Because for a moment it felt like just maybe.
Maybe there could be a way out of this violence.
I think there was this collective sigh of relief. And then that truce was announced.
And it wasn't just about a pause in the fighting.
It was about the potential for hostages to be released.
And some were right.
Yeah. 70 Israeli hostages returned home as part of that agreement.
And then a smaller number of Palestinians were released from Israeli prisons.
But here's the thing.
The truce ultimately failed.
So why did it fail?
It seemed like such a crucial moment, like this
Right.
glimmer of hope amidst all the darkness.
I think it's a classic case of,
The devil's in the details.
it brought a temporary halt to the fighting, but
It didn't really address those fundamental issues that sparks the conflict in the first place.
right, we're talking.
Deeply ingrained,
Yeah.
deeply complex issues.
Absolutely.
Things like the status of Jerusalem,
The right of return for Palestinian refugees.
the blockade itself.
Precisely. And these aren't issues that,
You can just resolve in a week, even with the best of intentions.
both sides harbored this deep mistrust.
Fueled by decades of conflict and broken promises,
So as soon as those 7 days were up,
the violence resumed.
and each side blamed the other, of course, for the breakdown.
Hamas argued that Israel hadn't upheld its end of the bargain.
Israel claimed Hamas violated the truce by continuing to fire rockets.
And so the back and forth continued.
The article mentions, numerous attempts at ceasefires and negotiations throughout the year.
But none of them stuck.
It feels like this endless,
Agonizing cycle where you see a sliver of hope emerge.
and then it's just immediately extinguished by this
It's true.
renewed violence.
It's a really apt observation. And
It highlights the complexity of this conflict because it's easy to get caught up in the day-to-day headlines.
But you have to remember that this is rooted in decades.
Even centuries of history.
There's trauma on both sides.
There's this sense of grievance.
That's difficult to overstate.
And that's something the CNN article really drives home, right?
Mhm.
It's not just about politics and territory.
It's about real people caught in the crossfire.
Exactly.
It's about the families in Gaza struggling to survive without access to basic necessities.
The children traumatized by the constant threat of violence.
It's about the Israelis living with the fear of rocket attacks.
The families of the hostages still held captive, clinging to hope.
And tragically, it didn't remain confined to Gaza, did it?
This conflict, the article talks about how it expanded and
Yeah.
drew in other players in the region.
It did, unfortunately.
It's like a fire that starts in one room and then quickly spreads throughout the entire house.
You have Hezbollah, the Iran-backed group based in Lebanon.
Launching attacks on Israel in support of Hamas.
Hold on a sec. Can you back up for a minute?
For those of us who don't follow the
Echo.
intricacies of Middle Eastern politics
Remind us who Hezbollah is.
and why they're involved here.
Of course. So Hezbollah is a powerful political and military organization in Lebanon.
With deep ties to Iran.
They've been a thorn in Israel's side for decades.
And their involvement in this conflict added yet another layer of complexity.
They claim that their attacks were in solidarity with the Palestinians in Gaza.
But for Israel, it was seen as a dangerous escalation.
So Israel responds to these Hezbollah attacks.
And suddenly, it's not just about Gaza anymore.
Exactly. Israel launched airstrikes and even ground operations in Lebanon.
Aiming to target Hezbollah strongholds and prevent further attacks.
But of course, this brought Iran more directly into the fray as well.
It sounds like this conflict has the potential
So
to
it spiral out of control very quickly.
That's the fear, isn't it?
You have all these different players,
Each with their own agendas.
their own historical grievances, their own alliances,
It's easy to feel overwhelmed by all of this, isn't it?
like trying to untangle this giant knot.
And then realizing there's no end in sight.
Yeah.
But amidst the chaos and the tragedy, the CNN article does hint at these moments.
Where a resolution almost felt
Yeah.
tantalizingly close.
There were these flickers of hope, right, throughout the past year, these moments where it felt like a negotiated settlement was almost within reach.
The article specifically mentions an agreement being.
Like 90% done in September.
What happened there?
It's a familiar story in conflict resolution, I'm afraid.
Both sides hit a wall.
Unable to agree on what they considered absolutely non-negotiable.
And what were those sticking points?
Primarily the prisoner exchange and the future of Gaza.
Hamas demanded a complete Israeli withdrawal.
Something Israel was staunchly against.
For Israel, it was about security.
Preventing future attacks.
For Hamas, it's about legitimacy.
It's about ending the blockade and establishing their own control.
So you have this heartbreaking stalemate.
This clash of ideologies and needs.
Absolutely.
And caught in the middle are...
Millions of ordinary people just trying to live their lives.
And that's what we can't forget.
It's easy to get bogged down in the geopolitical maneuvering.
But this conflict is ultimately about human beings.
About their lives, their hopes, their losses.
Those are the stakes that really matter.
So as we mark this grim one-year anniversary,
where do we go from here?
Is there any hope for lasting peace?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it?
The one that keeps diplomats, analysts, ordinary people up at night.
And if I'm being honest, there are no easy answers.
But there has to be some path forward.
Some way to break this cycle of violence.
I believe there is.
It's a faint glimmer in the darkness.
But it's there.
And I think the CNN article, despite all the heartache that it chronicles,
It does remind us that even amidst the rubble and the recriminations,
there are people working tirelessly for peace.
who are these people? What are they doing?
Well, they're diplomats, they're negotiators,
Humanitarian workers, ordinary citizens
both Israeli and Palestinian.
who refuse to give up hope.
They're engaging in dialogue, however fragile, however fraught it may be.
They're building these bridges of understanding person by person, community by community.
That sounds like a long and difficult road.
It is.
It demands patience and empathy and a willingness to see beyond those entrenched narratives.
But it's a road we must travel if we ever hope to reach a future where Israelis and Palestinians can coexist peacefully.
It's a powerful image, that road.
And on that note, to our listener who requested this incredibly challenging but incredibly important deep dive, thank you.
We've explored the events of the past year, the human cost, the geopolitical complexities.
And the seemingly insurmountable obstacles to peace.
But remember, even in the face of darkness,
there's always that glimmer of hope.
the path forward might be long and arduous.
But it's a journey worth taking.
So let's keep asking those tough questions.
Let's keep engaging in meaningful dialogue.
And never lose sight of that shared humanity that binds us all.